If I simply said to you, tell me what your values are, right? Most people would just simply be taken aback. They wouldn't know how to respond to that. Well, my values, freedom, honesty, democracy, actually a roof over my head, actually a bit of, a glass of wine with my meal. Those sort. But if I said to you, in this situation that you face, what are you worried you might lose? Once people adjust to that, because people don't like talking about losses, it makes them feel vulnerable. It makes them think they're being reduced, being shown to be weak. But as soon as they get into the importance of that question, fairly quickly, out comes half a dozen different things that they're worried about losing. And the usual example we might start with is someone who's been given a redundancy notice or a retrenchment notice from work. And you might say, well, the obvious loss is their job, therefore if they get another job, things will be okay. But actually, once they start naming it, it was the prospects of promotion. It was the fact that they had friends there. It was the fact that they play snooker at lunchtime. There were lots of different aspects of it. Respect of my wife for the income, the car came with the job. Suddenly you're into 6, then you're into 12. So this is multiple hidden losses. And once we've got this list of the losses, when you're facing this situation, we turn the whole lot upside down. And this is the really important trick. We say to people, you'd only name these as losses if they were things that you valued. So that list that we've now constructed, right? That's a list of your values. Yeah, that's what is important to you. That's what makes you tick. That's what makes you unique. That is who you are as a person, is those values. Yeah. And then we go on then to select one we call a smart loss, something you can recover fairly quickly in a short period of time. Yeah. And then you get onto the action plan. What do I do? And all of that emotional energy that you've mapped, first of all, the loss emotions, it's called, we collapse the chaos. I'm talking about we're mapping emotional chaos when people are in these states. And you collapse the emotional chaos into the action plan, very focused on a very specific named loss. Yeah. And the fact that you collapse the pattern of emotions means that whatever emotional state somebody was in, whatever whirlpools they were in, whatever overwhelm or overload, right, resolves itself. Yeah. So people rapidly discover they feel better and they're being more effective in the world, and they can measure their effectiveness as to whether they've actually achieved this very small achievable thing. Yeah. So people can start out feeling overwhelmed, not understanding their emotions, just knowing they feel bad. Right. Then we start naming the losses, but then we turn it around and say, no, these are your values. There's something here that's worth going for. And we agree an action plan. And then they discover they've got more energy than they realized towards that. Okay. So actually, ultimately, it's a solution-focused method, right? It moves on to the action. But in order to know the action, you need to map the energy, first of all. And then we discovered, as Maribeth, you'll be reading in the books, things called whirlpools of emotion, whirlpools of loss emotion, that trap people, trap their energy and make them feel either confused or distressed or tense. And then they abreact out of that. So a lot of socially disruptive behavior, common mental illnesses come out of whirlpools in grief reactions. There's unrecognized grieving. It gets labeled as mental illness or personality disorder or bad character. Yeah. And that just drives people scatty. Yeah. But as soon as you say, look, this is the grieving you only grieve if you've loved, right? That makes you more of a human being, not less. Right? Join the human race, huh? If you understood your grieving, you wouldn't get stuck like that, right? You would feel a different person. And people get it, and they really do develop. It really is a personal development method, yeah, by understanding your grief. So that, Janet, that's sort of like a summary of the method, yeah. So we're normalizing inner tension, confusion, distress, normalizing it to grief, educating, teaching, lifelong learning. Our coaches are guides to somebody else's self-help learning, right? That's where they're guides to somebody else's self-help learning. and they get the same results we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. In every culture, it's been translated into Mandarin Chinese, an African tribal language, Russian. It's in South Africa. It's, you know, Middle East. We've done it. It's basic core human nature is what we're tapping into in this sort of thing. So that was me giving a brief summary. Julie, is there an aspect of this that you would sort of focus on?
Yes, I think what's really important, I'm like Jan, very pragmatic about these things. I want to know how it's going to actually work on the 31st, for instance. How is this going to work? How is those duads going to work? What are they going to, with their 20 minutes, what are they going to be talking about? And one of the things that I want to really emphasize is how practical emotional logic is and how pragmatic it is. It's about real conversations between real people about real losses. So even though there is a huge amount of theory behind it and a huge amount of research which has revealed different emotional entanglements that lead to different emotional drives, the bottom line is it's about looking at what we lose in a situation or what we're frightened we're going to lose and how that informs our reaction. But more than that, with your 31st and the goals of trying to get people to understand their inner world and how difficult it is to reach resolution and build a relationship with people who have different values, it's actually the most beautiful way to help people understand and empathize with the other in this difficulty. So Jan, you and I on the phone, when we hadn't seen each other, you were talking about the lady or people in the yoga group not wearing masks. And it's a classic example, this. So we may feel a shock reaction and an inner loss reaction when we see people not wearing a mask. And we need to think, well, what have I lost here? What am I frightened I might lose? And the list is quite long, you know, starting with safety, health, consideration, respect from other people, you know, and going on to faith in systems, faith in the government, blah, blah, blah. But if you understand, either by projecting or, goodness gracious me, God forbid, asking, what are the losses the other person would experience if they wore a mask? Then you are understanding and building relationship with someone who does things differently to you. So we want to wear a mask, they don't. And rather than just internalize our outrage and our grief and our sense of loss of all the things that matter to us, we can build relationship by saying to them a simple question: what would you lose if you wore a mask? And they would say, well, whatever it is they would lose if they wore a mask. My losses would be A, B, C, D, E. And then you can sit there and look at each other's loss lists and think, now I get a little bit more of a feel what it's like for you to wear a mask, and you can get a little bit more of a feel about what it's like for me when you don't. And so you're building relationship even though your stand is different. And then you can look at whether or not there's hope of meeting some middle ground, some like a Venn diagram that overlaps those bits in the middle of the two circles, or whether it's just not going to happen. And then you need to utilize all that energy tied up with your upset and actually think, well, either I've got to move to acceptance and choose a different yoga group, or I can negotiate to recover something here. Something that matters to me, I could negotiate to recover.
So we use the 7-step model of grieving, not the 5-step one. And so it starts with shock and denial, are two that are paired at the beginning. As you recognize something's wrong, but you don't know what it is, so there's a drive to name, you know, can I recognize that I'm at risk of losing? Then you've got anger and guilt together, one outwardly directed, one inwardly directed, where you want to try and prevent the loss. Okay, so if I've named it on shock and denial, you know, using those constructively, can I then prevent that loss that I've named? And if you can't prevent it, if it's gone or it's just non-preventable, you move on to bargaining and depression, right? Where you've bargaining is what can I do to get it back? Okay, if it's gone. Depression is I've tried and failed. I'm discovering my limits. I feel empty and powerless. But we have something affirmative to say about every one of these. And then if on that depressive emptiness, you decide I found my limit, I can't get it back, then maybe I've got to look at what life looks like without it. I've got to look at acceptance. But When you come from a bereavement model, when someone's died, most people immediately think you've got to look at acceptance. But when you're looking at things like loss of the ability to play snooker with my friend, loss of driving a fancy car around, you know, things like that, which are still values to people, right? You really can do something to bargain to get them back. If you've got a list of 20 hidden losses, the issue is which ones do I need to accept and which ones can I try to bargain back? And people mostly don't realize how much power they've got to bargain back certain specific values, because the whole lot's been lost in this emotional turmoil. Yeah, they can't think clearly enough to make those decisions. And now what we discovered is that those three together at the end of the list, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, all three together work together to make what we call a growth cycle. So bargaining and acceptance, you're exploring new ways to handle losses, named losses. It only works on named loss. You've got to have a named loss, not a whole situation. Yeah, so the whole situation is you've got a different political belief. You're not listening to me. I'm powerless. Right? Well, no, actually, we're going to get inside that and name what values you've got. Right? I'm going to name my values. We're going to swap our lists. Right? And we might find that actually 50% of our values are identical. Yeah, so it's only 50% that we differ on. And no, we can't match on those, but I'll tell you what, let's have a deal, right? I will work to help you recover one of your values, right? And then it's your turn next. You help me to recover one of my values, right? I don't agree with your value. Hold on. I don't agree with your value, but if relationship is the outcome we want, I now have recognized that this is what you value. I may not value it for myself, but I value our relationship. We are one nation, right? We got people out there who want to destroy democracy as a whole. We don't need to destroy it ourselves. You know, we need to hold our relationship. We might have different opinions, and I will help you to recover one thing that you value, right? There's a dozen others you've named that I really can't, but I'm going to help you there. If you will help me recover something that's important to me. And we're recognizing that 50% of these things that we've named, we actually agree on. Yeah, even though we might be in completely different political parties and you're not talking to me and I'm not talking to you, once you start listing these hidden losses, you really get inside the heart of the person. And if they truly are Democrat, you know, I mean, you know, of the democratic free world,
yeah.
what I mean.
Small
Sorry,
Democrat.
yeah. You know, if they then there will be lots of common values in that, you know, the freedoms and so on, and to actually name those. Now, that's what tends to happen, is that people, when they see a conflict, go straight to the anger and guilt to prevent. I'm going to prevent something. They don't hang around on the shock denial bits, which are actually where that we say this is a message that something important to you is being challenged, but you haven't yet been able to work out what it is. So it's a message from your guts, chemically, emotionally, to find a safe place. Stop what you're doing, find a safe place, 3 sorts of safe places, and try and work out what's going on here. So you've got to name your losses. And that's what people don't do. And that's what emotional logic justifies, is stop what you're doing, take a bit of time out. And that's what we're going to be suggesting is your 31st of August thing. Stop what you're doing, take a bit of time out, and try asking those questions with a loss reaction worksheet. Don't worry about filling in the emotions, but can I name what I would miss? What's important to you, that to me or you, to me, first of all, start with oneself. And in a conversation, try and hear the other person. Julie, you know, you talked about our guess check technique.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to guess on behalf of somebody else what counts as a loss for them, and then check it out with them. You know, it sounds to me as if you might be worried about losing this. Yeah. Is that the case or not? And so that way people can fill out the thing. Now, Janice, I'm aware that I'm responding to something you said there. Does anything I'm saying about these multiple losses, about the growth cycle, about being selective, does any of that register for you as being something achievable or relevant where there is major divergence of opinion.